Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Urban Legends video. Alright, one last entry here based on your suggestions, and then I'll give these Urban Legends a rest for just a couple of weeks, and then start focusing on them again soon. So thank you as always for your continued suggestions. Very good ones this time around, very fascinating, very interesting ones to talk about. And if you hadn't seen yours listed, then by all means please showcase it next time around, and I may be able to get to it and showcase it as an entry here for my series. This one was interesting because I don't know if necessarily if it falls under an urban legend status. It seems to be more along the lines of like UFO and alien related, but at least on the urban legend side, it is one of those things where it's been talked about for quite some time. If even then, probably seems like decades of people just talking about what this mysterious thing is. And then with regards to the internet and all the discoveries of it and the expansion of the internet, it's just taken on a whole life of its own. So much so that even after decades of it, it's still as mysterious as it is when it was first reportedly detected. Now, a lot of the information still seems to be very vague when it comes to this thing. And what I'm talking about is the urban legend known as the Black Knight satellite, which you're looking at a picture of here. Now, I'm going to give my own thoughts as to what this thing is later on, but I'll try to relate as much information as possible with regards to this Black Knight satellite, at least from various places that I was able to pull up information on. Now, what's interesting is there's so many, I guess, different accounts of the Black Knight satellite from when it first was discovered. Like there's various versions of it to what I guess people have related to it with regards to sightings. It's very much so that some of the stories involving UFOs and aliens, some of those have been attributed either by accident to the Black Knight or vice versa, like the Black Knight satellite is its own entity, but it has been attributed to being like a UFO satellite, whatever it is in terms of aliens, on its own too. So a lot of this information that I'm going to present, it seems like it's weird. It's a mishmash of things that people attributed to the Black Knight satellite either on purpose or by accident, and it's up to yourselves to decide like truly what is the right thing. So as far as the Black Knight satellite and its this initial discovery, the strange part is it's been apparently an object that's been in orbit around Earth now for 13,000 years. Now, I tried to see like where the 13,000 years claim came from because the earliest known sightings or the origins of the satellite go back to, in most cases, it's attributed to the mid 1950s, but it could also be in the 1800s. But even then, the 1800s is just the earliest thing noted with regards to the Black Knight satellite. So if there's earlier indications of, let's say, it being 13,000 years old, I don't know exactly how that is attributed. Like, I don't know what stories, like who claimed it was 13,000 years old, or what person back then, 13,000 years ago, stated this is what we're talking about when it comes to the Black Knight satellite. So take that with a little grain of salt about it being approximately 13,000 years old. I think it's probably because, for all intents and purposes, the Black Knight satellite seems to be most commonly tied, at least kind of like in a fan wish kind of thing, with the monolith from the 2001 films. If you've seen the 2001 films, I have. I'm sure most of you have as well. If you haven't, check them out when you have a chance. They're definitely a trip when it comes to seeing them. Then there's a very prominent entity of some sort. I guess is the closest description. That is the black monolith. And so seeing something like that in pop culture and then seeing it in real life, or at least something as close to as possible as real life, I think that's where it comes to this thing being so old, because just like with the monolith in the 2001 films, it went back to the early dawn of civilization itself, and here you have something that could mimic it or could potentially be something similar to it, and so people attribute it to also being very, very old just by happenstance. So maybe that's a theory altogether. Now, as far as its earliest official known origins, it seems like the most commonly cited, at least on paper, instance seems to be it was the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and the San Francisco Examiner. They both ran stories with regards to a strange sighting by a retired naval officer. And you're looking at some of the clippings here. And this seems to be like the official one because, at least on paper, this was newspaper, in other words, on an actual printed newspaper, that this was the earliest known instance about this. And in it, all it says is that that the U.S. Air Force stated that there were two satellites orbiting Earth that were detected, and this was at a time when there were apparently no satellites orbiting Earth at all. So at that time, it seemed like the space race was on, and it was to have the first country have something orbiting the Earth. Things were not fully done yet, but at least in this case, there was already two satellites orbiting Earth that had been detected and that remained mysterious. And so this particular incident seems to be the first known place with regards to anything involving the Black Knight satellite. But as I mentioned a couple minutes ago, if you date back to the 1800s, it seems like no other than Nikola Tesla may have discovered the Black Knight satellite from the beginning, not visually, and not like, let's say, like official proof, like like official photographic or any kind of sighting proof, but rather he apparently detected something when it came to his radio waves, like whatever he was working on, when it came to picking up strange, I guess, communications or radio waves from Earth. He was the one that discovered these strange things, like the strange reading of sorts that was coming back to him. And I'll explain in a little bit what that could be when I try to dispel essentially the notion of the Black Knight satellite. Now, fast forward just a little bit to the 60s, and then that's when more proof, at least more proof when it comes to strange things orbiting the Earth, came about. This was a good year when it came to this. That's when people started discovering that there was these strange casings or these strange capsules that seem to be orbiting the Earth. Now, officially, the Navy was saying that this was kind of like a known thing because there was a Discover item that was launched into space. And at that time, its idea was it was trying to make sure that a man could be launched into space and then recovered in some kind of capsule, either like a capsule falling back to Earth in a parachute or some other method. But that one of the casings that came off the launch itself, just for this purpose, was lost. And so when it was lost, that's when this reported, I guess, ping that people were picking up throughout various parts of the Earth itself, that's what that was. That there was no mysterious object. It was actually a tracked casing from the Discover item. Now, the Navy actually was being a little bit telling the half-truth with regards to this, because apparently sometime later, a couple decades later, there was a mission that was declassified that stated that it was actually part of a secret program called Corona. And the idea was that back then they were launching these satellites not really as a way to get man into space or to test man into space, but to actually place cameras above certain parts of the Earth to start photographing them. And it's for espionage, for spy purposes. And the idea was that once that job was done, the only way that the camera could come back down, because there was no man up there at that time to just bring it down, in other words, it was simply like release, like a capsule was released. The capsule had a parachute. The capsule would orbit various parts of the Earth, and then once the parachute, or once it deorbited and it came back into entry into Earth, the parachute would launch itself and then it would be captured midair. Very spy stuff. I mean, this is like straight out of like the black ops kind of stuff that you would think of when it comes to the military. And that the initial idea that this was mainly part of a program to try to see how man would fare going into space was just a half-truth, when in actuality it was something to try to get into space, but it was cameras. And so the cameras were doing their job, they were taking pictures, and then they were placed back to, or jettisoned back towards Earth, and then captured by the military. And so that's what people were actually recording back then. Whether this is the truth itself, because again, this is coming from a supposed declassified program called Corona, from the CIA. Who knows if this is something else altogether different or just another made up story, another fabrication, if you will, to try to distill the idea that, hey, this is not some alien monolith of some sort orbiting the Earth. No, it's just really our own casings. That's up to for yourselves to decide. Now, cut to a couple years after that, and that's when you have the Soviets, or actually just around that same time, that's when the Soviets also began detecting something on their end. They claimed it wasn't from them. They thought it was actually like some kind of U.S. satellite of sorts. The U.S. thought it was actually from the Soviets, but that the U.S. was saying it wasn't from them either. But it's one of those other instances where another alien artifact of some sort was being discovered orbiting around the Earth itself. Probably, though, the best proof of anything tied to this, actually before that, back in 1973, so a couple of years later than that, this is not the proof that I was just talking about, but this is another instance. There was a man by the name of Duncan Lunan who apparently was monitoring some kind of radio waves or some kind of radio reflections that were happening, and he was able to interpret, I don't know how he did it, but he was able to interpret that he was picking up something, some sort of transmission, and the way it was transmitting, it was giving like a specific set of points, and the points he was able to triangulate them and then showcase that they were going towards some kind of location, like it was pinging back and telling them, hey, this is actually a very specific place where you can go, and like our point of origin is such and such. And it turns out that according to him, it was some place called Epsilon Budis, and that the date of the satellite, that satellite was telling him that it was the date of about 12,600 years ago. That's what I was saying earlier, like with regards to the 13,000 year part. It's still very, very mysterious as to where all of this comes from. If it truly did come from the satellite, then the satellite was telling this guy, but who knows? With regards to that information, this guy Duncan Lunan, if he in fact was able to declassify or interpret whatever the satellite was pinging off, then he's the only one that apparently was doing this, because no one else, it seems like, was able to do something along those lines. Now, cut to a couple years after that, and you have what is considered the most definitive proof of the Black Knight satellite, and that was a 1998 photo that was taken in space, and in it showcases what seems to be some kind of artifact just floating in space. Nothing like anything we've seen before. It's not like your traditional satellite that you and I know of, at least with regards to stock footage nowadays. It's not anything involving, let's say, a rock or some kind of meteorite that happens to be trailing the Earth's orbit. No, it just looks very, very mysterious. It has no concrete patterns. It's just all very amorphous. Like it has nothing definitive within it. It just looks like some strange thing that happens to be that happens to be orbiting space, and it has a black shiny look to it. And this has been attributed, finally, like people that have pointed to the Black Knight satellite stated, this is it, this is the actual thing. It was actually photographed during a mission, and then this is the proof that we finally have. So all those other instances over this past couple of decades, there really was no visual proof, but then by just happen chance, now you have it here all together 100%. This is the proof right there. But even this has been dispelled purposely, or as a way to try to con people into thinking, hey, this is not like a real alien artifact that's orbiting the Earth. No, it's just something else completely plausible altogether. The idea is that, and the way that it's been dispelled, is that what this is none other than a thermal blanket that was lost on one of the earlier missions. I don't know how a blanket gets lost in space, but presumably it was there somewhere within some kind of, let's say, a manned ship of some sort, and whenever some patch opened somewhere, that blanket was sucked out by accident, and then that's why it stays that way in space. Which, if you go by that angle, kind of makes sense, because obviously in space there is no oxygen, there's no wind, so something as far as a blanket would stay 100% still, almost like a vacuum, because it is a vacuum, because there's no motion, so the blanket would look like something else altogether. It would look very eerie, like normally you would picture, like, let's say something dangling or floating in the winds, but in this case it being in space with no vacuum at all, or essentially it being a vacuum with no air at all, then here you have something that would not move, and so that's why it gives off that eerie look. So that seems to be the most plausible explanation, but where it's coming from, it seems like it came from someplace. There was a Martina Redpath from an organization called Arma Planetarium, and then someone else named James Oberg, and they were the ones that were stating that it's most likely that it was a lost blanket during a previous mission of some sort. They're even the ones that seem to explain and give off what my opinion is. I think that this Black Knight satellite is like I mentioned at the very beginning. It's a mishmash of a whole bunch of things that happen to seem to be linked together only by sheer coincidence, like Nikola Tesla's thing. People report that the Black Knight satellite was attributed in some of the earliest known cases to him discovering it. But as it turns out, he was actually picking up some things from space, but they were natural occurrences. He was picking up the transmissions given off by quasars, but back then I don't know if people had any like 100% idea of what quasars were, but whenever that was happening, they just had to classify it as something like mysterious and something giving off from space. So not knowing what quasars were, then that's when it landed into that what if category. And then later on, of course, with the discovery of quasars and the discovery of what they can transmit, that's when nowadays there are stuff that's being transmitted in space, but it's much more science oriented. It's nature itself. It's the universe giving off its own sound, and so that's what that was. So, but that's been attributed to the Black Knight. Same deal with the articles pertaining to the newspaper clippings I showcased a couple of minutes back. It seems like those could easily fall into other reports about your average UFO sightings. Remember, that was a time when the UFO sightings were taking off as a phenomenon of sorts, and people left and right were stating that they were seeing things, and that people were starting to, in some cases, even have experiences with UFOs and aliens and the Greys. So it could be that a lot of those instances, including the ones with the newspaper clippings, just happened to be linked to the Black Knight satellite only because in some cases it made sense, in others it didn't. So there's that idea too. And then finally there's like the photographic proof that is the most, I guess, hallowed proof of the Black Knight satellite. It could be that it just is a floating blanket of some sort or some other item that was lost in space. But because everyone wants to believe that the Black Knight satellite is truly there, floating in space, monitoring human existence, just like the monolith in 2001, then you have people immediately jumping and saying, this is it. This is the item that we have long craved for when it comes to having physical proof of the Black Knight satellite. It's there for us to see now, and so it's been confirmed. So it's too easy to link everything to this particular place. It also seems kind of strange that if you have truly something like the 2001 monolith monitoring the Earth and making sure that it can keep track of human civilization, you would think that an advanced civilization like an advanced alien race like that would easily get itself on film. You would think that they would have some ways to make sure that they would not be able to be discovered so early on when it comes to what is relatively like space orbit, because space orbit is still just a couple decades old. So you would think that they would have had something in place to kind of balance and make sure that that was not done. But oops, they were captured on film already. So it just seems a little bit too coincidental. I don't know. Those are just my opinions about the Black Knight satellite. Otherwise, though, pretty fascinating information. If anyone has anything else I may have not discovered, including more proof with regards to that 13,000-year-old thing, if it's all just truly coming from one person and later them, I guess, deciphering what it was as far as information from the Black Knight satellite. That'd be great to hear. If anyone has any more, I guess, photographic proof or links to them, to the Black Knight satellite, that'd be great to hear too. But otherwise, great suggestions. So, all right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care.